Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're going to get started in just about 30 seconds. Hi, everyone, and welcome to NMWA xChange, a spinoff of the award-winning pandemic live stream series BMA NMWA. Last month, we discussed the French artist Suzanne Valadon and the special exhibition Suzanne Valadon, Model, Painter, Rebel, on view at the Barnes Foundation in Philadelphia until January 9th, 2022. If you missed that episode, watch it on NMWA's YouTube channel and subscribe to catch future episodes of NMWA xChange. And we will be sharing some pertinent links in the chat along the way. And I just want to thank our colleague, Laura Hoffman, for being with us today to take care of that for us. Thanks, Laura. Each month, hosts from NMWA are joined by special guests to center women creatives. We consider topics relevant to our world and offer insight into collaborations NMWA is fostering while its building is closed for renovation. During this time of change, we are excited to exchange ideas with our guests and viewers. Today's episode, Remembering Those Lost, features Washington, D.C. area artist and advocate Suzanne Brennan Firstenberg. She's here to discuss her recent installation project, In America, Remember, which honors Americans who died of COVID-19. The end of 2021 marks the solemn second anniversary of the first known case of COVID in the world. And I just want to say hello. My name is Gayoso, and I'm NMWA's Senior Educator.
Hi, I'm Jenny Treanor. I'm NMWA's Associate Curator. For those of you joining us today, feel free to add your questions and comments to the chat box or the Q&A, and we will, in the course of our discussion, do our best to address them. Suzanne, thank you so much for being here today. It's lovely to see you.
Jenny, Addie, thank you so much for having me today.
So I wanted to start this conversation with a personal story because this is a very personal experience project for a lot of people. So I'm in Washington, D.C., and last fall, my family and I, my husband and our two kids, went over. We'd kind of been hearing about, this thing over by RFK Stadium, and, it was about COVID, and we thought, well, let's go check it out. So we went over there. It was a really cold and windy day, I remember, and we came across the first iteration of this installation, and that one was called In America, How Could This Happen? So this was fall 2020. We were already almost a year into the pandemic at that point, and the numbers were just going up and up and up. And I just want to share quickly a shot of that installation. It's kind of hard to make out in the picture, but those grids there in the middle, those are all the tiny white flags. I think that when we went there, it was probably about half full, maybe 3/4 full. And there were volunteers there who were very nice. And, they gave us each a flag, and we each planted a flag in honor of someone who had passed away from COVID. I feel extraordinarily blessed and lucky to say that I don't know anyone really directly personally who has passed away from COVID, but I know of friends and other family members who have lost loved ones. And so it was a really sobering experience. And I didn't realize until I went there how needed it was, right? This space to go, to be, to honor, to remember. And for me, particularly as a visual person, to see physically the numbers that are so abstract when you hear them a lot of times on the news, to see those represented as individual objects, it was really staggering. So of course, this project unfortunately kept on growing and led to the second iteration of it, which was on the National Mall this year by the Washington Monument. And that project was called In America Remember. And that was up through, that was September 17th through the beginning of October 3rd of this year. And my family and I went back down. There's a wonderful shot of it. And again, to see how the numbers had grown in the space of a year was just absolutely staggering. So as we enter into our conversation today, I guess I'd like to start off by asking you, Suzanne, where this impulse came from for you. What compelled you to enumerate and memorialize those who died of COVID? And how does this body of work fit in with the rest of your work? Because you've been a practicing artist for many years now. So yeah, if you could just get us started by answering those questions, that would be fantastic.
Jenny, thank you so much for mentioning that you had come to that first iteration of In America last fall. And thanks for helping plant flags. People helped me plant over 100,000 last fall. And you're right, until you get there and you see and experience the physicality of these flags, it's hard to truly understand the immensity of these numbers. And that's one of the reasons why I created both of these iterations of the art. It was to help people understand the magnitude of our loss. When numbers become so big that they're incomprehensible, they're simply too easy to dismiss. And so I wanted, as a visual artist, to make the number come alive for people so that they could fully understand the magnitude of what was happening. And so that's why I created this art, both at RFK Stadium and the National Mall. But not only as a major, massive data visualization project, but also as a memorial. Just as you say, so many lives have been lost to COVID-19, and so many of those losses have happened in isolation, without funerals, without public acknowledgement. I think that at the core of our being is wanting to be acknowledged and wanting loss to be acknowledged. And so while this was an art exhibition, it truly also became a memorial to many people. And then also I wanted to create this physical manifestation of empathy, because that's what's so lacking now. We are so caught up in our own COVID worlds that to appreciate and understand the importance of empathy, to me, was really important in these times. It does relate to my prior work in many ways. I tell people that they will not visually recognize my work as with many other artists, but they will feel it viscerally. And this, like other works of mine, really gets to capturing the dignity of people. I wanted to recapture the dignity of every person who had been compressed into a number in this art installation. But with others, I have used as well this theme of dignity. One of my methods, that's the content, but the form is often very similar to what you've seen here. I use beauty and beautiful things, beautiful exhibitions and aesthetics to draw people in, and then I deliver the message. One of the ways I did this, I think it was in 2016, it was with Updraft America, an installation of over 10,700 paper airplanes. People would come and see these beautiful airplanes, half striped red, half striped blue, flying in squadron-like formation into the air. But when they got closer, they realized, oh, they are all folded from the congressional record. And so that was my way of suggesting that Congress could do better with the time and resources that we've provided them as their employers. And also it shows that desire to make something beautiful, to bring people into it, and then to really deliver a more hard-hitting message. And that's what you see here within America, because from a distance, it looked like a beautiful field of snow or white flowers. It looked like the mall was blanketed. And so I wanted to lure people into the reality of what's really happening.
That's a really interesting point, Suzanne, and we talk a lot about this at the museum in terms of contemporary art and its ability to both sort of pull people in and push them back at the same time, right? This importance of seeing something as sort of holistically really beautiful, and it piques our interest. And then when I had the opportunity to walk through sort of the aisles of In America Remember on the mall, seeing those individual flags and the commentary on those flags, the memories of individuals lost that were submitted by friends and loved family members, colleagues. And some of those notes, they were all heartbreaking, right? Because they're all a reminder of someone who's no longer with us. But some of them were really, they were painful, because there were commentaries about folks who were sort of being stubborn about not getting a vaccination, or those who were sort of there were certain descriptions of people being sort of selfish for not caring for themselves and therefore sort of hurting their loved ones. So it was very much a push-pull for me. And I appreciated that I had that opportunity to see it in person as well. Your work for me, and I've learned a lot about having great conversations with you in advance in preparation for the show. And we'll share your website link so folks can dig into your previous work. But what I'm noticing about your work is your body of work is there's this sort of simultaneous reminder of the presence and the absence of loved ones in our community, and also this notion of this collective spirit of community. And I'd love to talk a little bit more and hope you can share with us a little bit about like the community. This was your idea, but there was a community of folks who you needed to lean on to make this project happen. And I do want to mention, I don't know if you noticed in the chat, there's someone joining us today, at least one person, Nancy Spittle, who helped. She was one of your volunteers. So I just wanted to sort of send a nod to all of the folks who helped to make this project happen, and hope you can talk a little bit more about that.
Addie, thank you so much for mentioning the volunteer aspect of this. And Nancy, thanks for tuning in. We had over 1,000 people help with this art installation. When people say, oh, Suzanne planted all these white flags, first of all, I didn't. I planted some of them, but I had a huge lift from Rupert Landscape. Rupert Landscape dedicated over 1,500 man hours to helping to get these flags planted. When presenting art on the National Mall, there's just such a limited time for installation and deinstallation, and Rupert Landscaping helped tremendously in creating grids that we could use for planting in an array, because it just had to be planted in an array, and each flag had to be planted by hand. So they were important in creating this art. People like Nancy were very important in greeting visitors, in helping guide them in the flag planting process, and also in collecting flags. We had 3 days of very, very intense flag collection at the end of this art installation. But this art installation wouldn't have even happened without terrific support and encouragement by the Trust for the National Mall, by the National Park Service, a terrific group of people that partnered with us, especially the permitting specialist, Marissa Richardson. We had support from Anthea Hartig and all at the Smithsonian National Museum of American History. And so it takes a group, it takes a village to create art like this. And so my hat's off to all the volunteers, and then also to the 18,000 plus people who dedicated flags. I consider them to have been artists, co-artists, if you will, with me, because it was those personalized messages on the flags that really helped visitors to understand the immensity of the emotion and grief that was represented there on the mall for these 17 days. Each day, it was a living exhibition. You see there a picture of me with one of those grids. I wanted to help people understand that loss was continuing. And so on a major sign we had that had the logo In America Remember on it, I also had the death toll. There you go. Very quickly, it moved from our beginning number of 666,000 to 670,000. And it grew by 2,000 on average, over 2,000 flags each day. So I had visitors help me plant the additional flags each day. And that really ritualized this feeling that it was continuing and we had to do everything we possibly could to help keep people safe.
I'm just wondering, Suzanne, that kind of repetitive process of going to this sign and changing the numbers, and having to do it over and over and over again, did that create for you kind of a space for further reflection in those moments? Did you feel like it was almost a ritual action of some sort?
Such a great question, Jenny. It was more than performance art. It was creating community around the flags that was important. When people would come and help plant additional flags or write a flag for someone whom they had lost, or just when people would come and say, oh, what is this? They became involved. They became activated in the space. What happened for me in being there 23 straight days, 10 to 12 hours a day on the mall, was the National Mall was transported. It was transformed into a sacred space. And it was a space where people could talk with strangers and be consoled by strangers. One woman described having planted a flag for her mother, and then she laid on the ground to take a photo of it with her cell phone, but she became so overwhelmed with her grief that she just put her head down and cried. After she gathered herself, as she was standing, she noticed a bicycle laying on the ground and a man beside it who had just planted a flag himself. And he looked at her as she rose with tears in her eyes, and he said, "You look like you need a hug." And she said, "Yeah." And there she was, hugged by a complete stranger. And that's the kind of caring and respect for each other's dignity and grief that we saw over and over again in this space. I have to tell you, I've never seen so many, forgive me, middle-aged men express their sadness through tears. One other quick story, there was a cardiologist from Denver who came, and he said that he had lost his mother in May and his wife in June to COVID, but he had to, as a pulmonologist, head straight back to the hospital, put on his doctor's face and continue treating patients. So when he got to this art in September, he said he finally could get in touch with that grief that had been tamped down inside him. And it was such an honor as an artist to be able to create an experience where people could do this on a personal basis, come to terms with their grief, but also comfort strangers. You know, I didn't have a section for Democrats or for Republicans. We were all there just as one. And I think that we need to find more ways to create these opportunities for strangers.
Suzanne, I'm really curious about your choice. You've spoken about this idea of trying to sort of identify a unit that represents life, right? And you came to you settled on these flags. And I'm really curious to know a little bit more about the process of making that decision and procuring and personalizing and planting those flags. Why flags? And tell us a little bit more about them.
Well, there I was in August of 2020 as a visual artist, feeling compelled to create this art, and I needed to find one unit that I could afford $250,000 of that would have enough presence to honor an individual. And going through all the different ideas, I arrived at flags because they make noise. They have physical presence, and flags are throughout history and throughout cultures imbued with message and with meaning. And so white flags in particular became very important to me. First of all, from the functional aspect of being able to be written on and dedicated to individuals. That was really important to me. But as well, the iconography of the American flag in an election year had been truly hijacked. And I did not want to in any way let politics enter into this because it's a subtext anyway. And so I wanted it to be as clean and pure and reflective of Arlington Cemetery as I could get. And that's why the flags were planted in an array, and that finalized the decision to make them white. So that's why you saw white flags in 2020. And that's why I again brought that iconography of white flags to the National Mall. You know, when you see pictures of the art installation from the air, from a distance, it really does look like the mall is blanketed. So you show the reality behind this art installation. This harkens back to the concept that I didn't do it alone. I certainly didn't. When people look at art, it's important to understand, especially in exhibitions or installation art, there's so much work that goes into it. From the day I greenlighted this with the National Park Service on February 26th to the day when we first began to install flags, you can see how many more people were involved. From the lower left-hand corner, you have the people who are involved in the physical operation, the National Park Service, the flag manufacturer. I even worked with the film extruder in South Carolina to find the perfect type of material that could stand up to history and time and yet be easily recyclable. You see, just like Nancy was mentioning, we had a whole core of volunteers who really made it possible. Esri is an important member. If you look on the far left side, it was really important to us to make this art installation available to people across the country, whether they could afford to come or not. It was, I mean, so many people couldn't afford the time or money to travel to DC to experience the art. So Esri helped us to create a website on which we reflected the art through a map, and people could send us flag dedications, which our host of volunteers would then write onto flags and plant. And then if you look in the far right-hand corner, or upper right, I partnered with Dr. Sarah Wagner and her team at GW University. Dr. Wagner's anthropologist, and she helped us to geolocate the flags. GW University was a critical element in making the flags on the mall visible individually through the website inamericaflags.com. So this just shows the work that went into this whole operation, and I just have to express immense gratitude to everybody who helped to make this possible.
I have to say your planning document is a beautiful work of art as well. Really, I love looking at it. It's just so.
It's a symphony.
So you had the idea really right from the beginning to be able to write on the flags. Is that correct?
Yes, because it's so important to have people understand that each of these white flags represented immense concentric circles of grief around each person whom we had lost. You know, we are losing the concept of dignity and the value of each person. And so having people write on these flags, and I can show you a few here in my studio. For instance, here is one. In memory of Chris Papazan, who died of COVID along with his twin brother, both owners of beloved Rosley, New York pharmacy, both 53 years old. You know, the stories, each flag has such power to convey the story behind that loss. So it was really important for me to have those flags, to have them be able to be dedicated, and to have the partnership of Esri to increase the reach, because equity now is just such an important part of what we need to strive for as artists.
And I have to mention, so Suzanne is joining us from her studio, and what we see behind you, Suzanne, correct me if I'm wrong, are those all boxes of flags from this project?
Yes, actually, we had 147 different sections of flags there on the National Mall. Each section had approximately 5,000 flags. So what you see behind me are almost 20,000 flags that have been personally dedicated to individuals. I and a host of volunteers are cleaning these flags, documenting them, making sure that they have photographs, and archiving them. Not only are they art, they are also an historic record. And so these flags will be kept in an archive so that people, historians, scholars, anthropologists, sociologists will be able to study them and see evidence from this time. Because there's so much evidence lacking from the Spanish flu pandemic from a century ago. As well, I feel compelled to have portions of these flags travel around the country in exhibition to further reach people, because they are so compelling and they tell an important story. And also, I want to have people have a chance to add flags to the installation, because more people have died. So if we do conceptualize some type of traveling exhibition, there will be a continuing opportunity for participation. But I have to say, the flags will never again be presented as they were on the National Mall. That was one of a kind.
I think two really important or sort of compelling parts of this project for me. One was the siting of this work on the mall, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about why the mall and why sort of right next to the Washington Monument. And then there was also this moment of comparison between the United States and our response, as well as that of another country, New Zealand, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly. But I'd love to hear a little bit more about your citing of this work, and also about why this comparison for you is really important.
Citing this on the National Mall was a true honor for me as an artist, and just so important, because in addition to the data visualization and creating a memorial, I really wanted to give our nation a moment of pause. This pandemic is going to go on and on. It will become an endemic. And there is no stopping point, right? There is no transition point when we can all just stop and reflect. That's what I wanted the art to do. But as well, I felt compelled to put it in comparison. We as a country, we don't do pandemics. We came into this one really not understanding the scope, what this could entail or what this could mean to us. And so in the front of this art installation, I planted two arrays. One was of 27 flags, the other was of 1,809 flags. This, you see, is the array of 1,809. The smaller array of just 27 flags represented New Zealand's cumulative death toll at the time that In America began on the National Mall. If we had had the immediate leadership, the social cohesion, the excellent protocols for testing and contact tracing and quarantining, I would have only had to have planted proportionally 1,800 flags. And I needed to show this so that visitors would understand that this white flag, this blanket of surrender that they saw in the National Mall, was really a cry for us to figure it out, to change our concept of patriotism, if you will, to think about patriotism not as being just wrapping oneself in the American flag iconography and demanding our individual rights, but for caring for others' rights. And so this was my nod to that, to understanding that we need to care for each other and each other's rights just as much as for our own.
Suzanne, I think we talked a little bit about this in one of our pre-meets. But of course, you know, the National Mall has been called America's front lawn and has been the site of many different projects over the decades. But the one that resonates the most for me in relation to this is the Aids Quilt. which was a completely different medium and material, but kind of the same driving force, right? As what can we do to remember those lost, to draw attention to it, and put it somewhere that everyone will see it. And so I'm just wondering how much, that was in the back of your mind, or if you see a parallel there, or if you, relied on any of the same ideas that were used in that quilt.
It's interesting because, I really do believe that the Aids Quilt was one of the best public art installations ever, because using the iconography of the American quilt when homes were broken up by people not accepting homosexuality. It was a time when families were torn apart. And that same thing has happened with COVID-19. But sadly, it seems like instead of having my art happen at a time when we're knitting communities back together and when we are establishing social acceptance of others, we're going in the opposite direction right now. And so I think there is a call for more and more art that can create a sense that others matter. We need to quit seeing each other as strangers and truly appreciate that others have the same feelings, desires, quests, pain and loss that we do. And so my next bodies of work will address changing our selfie mentality and pushing for better understanding of the concept of other and overcoming that concept of other.
I think your work is, this piece in particular is so much a metaphor for sort of setting aside individualism and sort of ideology for sort of this communal effort to remember and acknowledge. And I'm so grateful for your work on this and your continued work on this. And I'd love to know, you sort of alluded to it, but what's next? This is, to your point, we are still living through this pandemic. People are still dying every day. We are almost in the United States now at 800,000 deaths due to COVID. And it's sobering to sort of confront that every day. What, Suzanne, what is sort of next for you for this project? Maybe you can talk a little bit more. And we have some invitations to participate as well. And I don't know if you'd like to share, and we'll provide the link in the chat, but this is ongoing. So please tell us more about that.
Thanks for asking about that, Addie.
Yeah.
The concept of making this art in some form available to people across the nation is important to me. We in the Washington, D.C. area are so privileged to be able to experience all that the mall has to offer, all the things that happen on the mall, but to get them out into other people's lives across the country is important. So I'm working hard to conceptualize that. We had the terrific help of a documentary filmmaker and professor from Stanford University, Jamie Meltzer, and he created a 15-minute art film that truly captures the essence of people dedicating flags. And so that will probably be, it's a brilliant piece of filmmaking on his part, and that will probably be part of any traveling exhibition that we do organize for In America Remember. And then I'm hard at work doing research for the next work that is to come. We have a lot to be done. To me, it's important to use visual art right now more than ever, because people are becoming so locked in their echo chambers, particularly echo chambers of ideology, through technology. They're simply cycling right in, staying within their echo chambers. And so, as I say, art is the one thing that can creep in through the air vent or slowly glide in under the door and unlock those echo chambers from the inside. And so I'm firmly committed to continuing to try to do that.
Thank you, Suzanne. I think now is maybe a great time to open the floor to any questions. We actually have one from Carmen. Thanks for joining us, Carmen. She says that your work and the Aids Quilt are about two major events in US history that deal with death. Are there other pivotal points that you might make to create, make a creation in tribute to? So other sort of maybe moments in US history that you've been thinking about in terms of marking with a work of art?
What a fascinating question. It is interesting that we as Americans in particular have such an odd reaction to and relation with death.
Mm-hmm.
We tend to ignore it, avoid it at all costs, and yet it's the one thing that's guaranteed for each of us. I think that my dedication to this particular art and to another art installation I have that addresses death, and that's death from overdose, is to really capture the dignity and to help people find a way to express themselves over the death of a loved one. I'm referencing in particular the Empty Fix series, which I just completed right before the pandemic ended. And that is a 7-installation art series specifically to decrease the stigma surrounding drug addiction. I think there's a draft, and here's one of those 7 installations. I had traveled 57,000 miles crisscrossing America. I think I went to like 23, 24 different states. And I interviewed hundreds of people who were suffering or recovering from drug addiction because I had to understand it. And what you see are the eyes of people whom I interviewed. I have 168 different individual blocks of eyes. And what I do is I present them in fountains and reflecting pools, because we will walk right past someone who's slumped over on the sidewalk from addiction, but we would never walk right past somebody who's drowning. Mm-hmm. Addiction is like drowning. And what I want to do is change the viewer's relationship to that person who is suffering. Again, this is about dignity of the individual, and it is about finding the commonality and caring that will move us through. So the eyes will be presented in fountains and reflecting pools across the country as a public art installation. And public art is important because not everyone would choose to go into a museum to see art that decreases the stigma of drug addiction, right? So this is one of those that is for presentation outside. Another one of those art installations is called Unforgotten. And this is jean pockets strung together, which people can dedicate to individuals whom they had lost. Here you see a picture of a man. This was in Bethesda, Maryland in 2019. I had just finished putting up the jean pockets. And he came over to me and he said, you know, my cousin died in the Vietnam War from after the Vietnam War from drug addiction, and I've never talked about it. My family's never mentioned his name after that. Could I add his name? And I'm like, of course, this is what this art is about. And so he too added a name to a jean pocket. This is an art installation that can be replicated by any community, and that's one of my goals with this one, was to ensure that people could replicate it easily, because this is something that can bind communities together. We are set in our own echo chambers, but if we can, as a community, acknowledge the humanity of others and see that humanity demonstrated, whether it's a death from COVID or a death from drug overdose, that can help people transcend ideology and see each other simply as humans.
I love what you said about the importance of public art. I think that was absolutely spot on. You know, getting art out of the rarefied space of the museum and the gallery, where many people might feel intimidated to go into. And so to bring it to them, right, in the course of their daily lives, And
Yes.
then to take it one step further and to have it be interactive, right? That they are participating. I think that the way you are able to make art accessible in all the meanings of the word is really just so it's so needed at the moment, like you said, and it's really so poignant.
Thank you, Jenny. One of the things that caught my attention at the National Mall was that many people had no idea that that installation, that exhibition was happening there. They just came upon it, and then they were stopped in their tracks. And I think that's the power of public art, is to call attention when people aren't paying attention. And these days, a lot of people are not paying attention. So
I want to see if there are any other questions from our audience. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today. There are a few things as we sort of wait to see if we get any more questions that come in. I just want to mention, we have a couple of invitations for our viewers. One is that if you are local to the Washington, D.C. area, Suzanne and volunteers are in the process, she mentioned this, of cleaning and archiving the flags from In America Remember, and she would love to welcome you into her studio as a volunteer. So we have shared, we'll share her website if we haven't already. Thanks, Laura. And feel free to sign up to volunteer. If you have lost a loved one to COVID, Suzanne is still accepting dedications for her flags as well, and they will continue to be written and recorded. And then just a public service announcement. We continue to live through this pandemic, and COVID continues to claim lives. So please stay safe and protect your loved ones and yourself this holiday season. You can visit vaccines.gov for more information on receiving a free COVID vaccination or booster. And we just want to thank Suzanne again for joining us today and for your work. I have to say, one thing you shared with us during one of our conversations was that, you were a volunteer in hospice care, and this sense of compassion that you have and this cherishing of individual human life is so resonant in your work. So I just want to thank you and your entire team for bringing this work to DC and for sharing it around the country as we move forward.
Well, thank you so much, Addie and Jenny, for having me this morning. It is quite an honor to get a chance to talk with you about this art. And I appreciate you sending the messages for safety and inclusivity as we move forward. And I hope everyone will take up the opportunity to come visit the studio. There's a lot of work to be done archiving these flags.
Well, you've gotten yourself 2 dedicated volunteers already, I know. So.
Thank you so much.
You'll be hearing from us shortly, for sure. Yeah, it's So it worked out well for all of us. I think that we're physically in the same area. So like you said, I mean, we are so lucky living in DC to have access to so many wonderful institutions and events. And again, just as I mentioned at the beginning, this really just came on my radar. I don't know if it was through social media or whatever. And I just thought, let's go over there and check it out. And yeah, here we are.
It's interesting. One person characterized it as an emotional pressure valve for our country. And it just speaks to all the different ways in which art can make a difference.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And you've really shown that, for sure. Thank you so much, Suzanne, for being with us today. It was a sobering yet uplifting conversation. I hope that you felt the same. Indeed.
Thanks, Suzanne. And I just want to do a quick plug for our next episode. I hope you all will join us. It's our next episode of NMWA xChange is on Tuesday, January 11th at 12 noon. And our topic will be the 17th century Dutch painter, Curator. We will be joined by a National Gallery of Art curator, Alexandra Libby, to discuss Peter's position as a pioneer of still life genre, as well as NMWA's loan of our Curators to the National Gallery while the museum is closed for renovation. Please register, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Again, Suzanne, thank you, and I look forward to visiting your studio to help with the flags. Thank you all for joining us.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.